Hey everyone, Ophi back for another Starstruck episode with Sam Reynolds.
Hello.
Hello, Scorpio. Put that tail away. As he tucks his tail, I will introduce him. Sam owns Unlock Astrology. He writes for Tarot.com. He writes their horoscopes and is on the board of directors of ISAR, the International Society for Astrological Research. Very distinguished. But you're really someone I think of as an astrological scholar and historian. Yeah, and a great speaker too. And you make the rounds of the conferences.
Yeah, thank you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and what are you up to at the beginning of 2020? How are you
Well,
starting?
I am taking a transformational voyage. It sounds like I'm about to go into therapy. I'm actually going to be doing a cruise with Dr. Patricia Bell and Nadia Shaw and Kenneth Miller and Cassandra Butler. So it's focused on healing, and we're talking about using the power of 2020 for healing.
Very cool.
So while we're cruising. So I think we go to Cozumel. I think it's Bermuda. Not Bermuda. I always want to say Bermuda, but it's the other one. The other B. Bahamas. Not Belize. Oh, wow. That would be like
Can
something
you even
else.
cruise to
But yeah.
Belize?
Right? I don't know if people cruise to Belize, but I mean, I don't know how you would get in there.
But take me there however I
Right?
can get there, right?
However you get there.
So, healing cruise.
A healing cruise.
That is hashtag astrologer life. That's the way to do it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, that sounds awesome. Well, it's good. You might need that healing cruise because we're entering
Yes, we are.
a decade, very heavy, historic year. And Sam is going to talk about America's Pluto return.
Yeah, it doesn't actually happen in 2020, but it's coming up. And what that means is that Pluto is coming back to its original position as it was when the United States was formed in 1776. Now, there are lots of different charts that are kicked about for the formation of the United States. There's one for like the day before, there's one that's going with the Articles of Confederation in 1789. So there's all the different ways in which we could talk about, the United States being formed, but roughly around the time of 1776, we're talking about Pluto coming back to its degree, and I think that's like 28 degrees of Capricorn. And so we're coming within that window, closer and closer.
Creeping up on the 2024.
So that's literally what it means. So that people are like, well, what does it mean? And well, Pluto has been in Capricorn for some years, but it's inching year by year up to the point that it gets to the actual return.
So when a planet returns to where it was, you'll see themes and cycles repeat themselves, which is why we love astrology too, because you always can refer back. I mean, Pluto being the farthest planet from the sun, and yes, we think of it as a planet.
Yes, we do, damn it.
Yeah. Do you know only 4% of the Astronomical Society was there when they voted Pluto off the island of planets? 4%. That's a minority.
Their conference was basically over.
Right. Oh yeah. Yeah. They're like, you know what? Before we head out for happy hour, let's get rid of Pluto. It's nothing but trouble. So we brought Pluto. We've always kept Pluto in the fam. Right. So, so Pluto being the farthest from the sun in our solar system takes the longest to make its trip all the way through the zodiac, and so that's why it's been since the 1700s that it was in Capricorn, and it's now in Capricorn from 2008 to 2024, which has been such an interesting political cycle, starting with Obama. We don't know who it's going to end with, but it is, a complete round of election cycles in the United States. So interesting.
And in Europe, I mean, as we're seeing with Britain has gone through a transformation recently with their elections, right?
Yeah.
So.
And we have two Geminis. We got Boris Johnson and Donald Trump when the North Node, which is our collective fate, is returning to Gemini in 2020 as well.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So a lot of interesting cycles. Little fun fact, Alexander Hamilton was a Capricorn, Mr. 1776 himself. Mm-hmm. So a lot of Capricorn stuff. What do you make of it? What do you see?
In terms of like
just the Pluto Capricorn return and all the Capricorn, like what's intriguing you about this
What's intriguing
return?
me is that this really becomes a powerful reckoning for the United States in relation to power. And when I say reckoning, I don't want people to go to doom and gloom. It's like, are we going to get nuked? Right. It's more so, we have some unfinished business. And when I say we, I am talking about the United States. We have some unfinished business in terms of how we think, move, and feel about power in this country. And when I say about power, because if we go back to 1776, right, we had a revolution. Yeah. And the revolution was about who was in charge, and of course that was King George, and it was the whole idea of how he was abusing his power, right? And then it was also about some other things that we don't talk about enough. So that one particular thing that I think about a lot is in relation to who's on the ground in relation to dealing with power. And that in 1776 were the Redcoats. That was the actual military, right? In 2019, it's been even more recently about the police. Yeah. And so one of the things that I expect us to be dealing with as we go farther into the next decade is how we are rectifying the power that the people have in relation to the police. And that doesn't mean, as you know, I tweet a lot about this, and so
right.
And I've
Follow
been on Twitter.
Sam on Twitter.
I'm on Twitter, SF Reynolds, S as in Sam, and F as in Fred Reynolds, all one word.
We'll put it in the show notes too.
So one of the things that I've been talking about for at least 10 years on Twitter, because I've done a lot of research in relation to the police, and I'm not coming from the perspective that I think the police are evil. Or the perspective that I think that I'm talking about individual officers. So if you have family members or if you yourself are a police officer, I'm not looking at you like, you're corrupt, you're the enemy, right? I'm not of that mindset. What I am of the mindset is that we fundamentally have to look at how we've endowed the police with a certain level of power that have really detached them from the people. Right. And when I say from the people in terms of not just black people, I think that's one key starting point. So I do understand what has happened with Black Lives Matter. Yeah. I'm also talking about just in terms of how we're policing, you know, from how we're looking at people in surveillance.
Data, all the
data that's collected.
That is policing.
And then also in terms of, you know, who the police answer to. So going back to 1776, for example, it was possible for the military to kind of search and seizure, you know, just like, what's in your bag? Nothing, I just have groceries. No, let me see your bag. And kind of go through your bag. There was the actual, in terms of quartering acts, where you would have to sometimes quarter the military in terms of particular empty spaces that you had available within your home. Or even property that you owned. So we're not at that particular point, obviously, in terms of what we're dealing with the police, but what we are dealing with is how pervasive their powers can be. And one thing that many people don't know is that in most municipalities in the United States, the department chief is actually appointed by a mayor. It's not selected by the people or vote. Democratic aspirations or anything democratic. Why that's important is that there's a certain detachment that has happened between how the people are able to kind of voice their concerns in relation to the police and how they're managed or policed and how the police can operate. And that's really about power. So I think one of the things that we'll be looking at in their 20s is the charter, you know, like the police charter, where they get their power from, how they're operating with their power. And I'm not just making it about the police and your individual police departments in your different municipalities. It's more so on the ground level that we're talking about government and then how that goes into all different layers of government. So currently, like this month, we're dealing with the issue of impeachment of the President of the United States based on the abuse of power. That's a Pluto return issue.
Yeah, that is.
You know, whether the president is actually convicted by the Senate remains to be seen, but it looks like he will be impeached by the House. Now, some will look at that and say that's just partisan nonsense. I'm not going to get into the politics of that.
As astrologers, we may have our own personal politics, but our job is to be sort of like the 30K foot view above the Earth, like aliens in a spaceship. Some of us think of ourselves as aliens for real. No names will be named, but and to just observe what's happening. Like, what is the story the sky is telling us, and what's happening here down below, and how do they correlate? So we almost have to be like, well, not almost, we have to be like objective reporters, which is not always easy.
No, it's not easy for me, definitively.
Yeah.
Like, I don't get into horse races in terms of who's going to predict the presidency and different things, because I usually have a strong opinion, and I don't let the astrology, or I don't try to put or superimpose my ideas on the astrology. I think a number of astrologers do that, but I try to avoid that. But anyway, I mean, one of the things that I was talking about with the impeachment of the president is that we're looking at a general concern about how are we using power? How are those in power using their power? There are some people who are making the argument that the House of Representatives, those who are making this impeachment, are actually abusing their power. Right. And I think regardless of how we're looking at that, as a citizen, I'm looking at it. I don't know how you're looking at it or how you're looking at it. I'm looking at it like, yeah, well, how is my voice felt here? I mean, we had a whole revolution. When I say we, meaning the United States, had a whole revolution with the key intention of giving power to the people, right? Mm-hmm. Do we have it? I mean, how are we doing? How are we doing with that power?
Right, because a return really is like a check-in. Some of you have heard of your Saturn return. That's the most popular return that we talk about around age 29, 30. And, but every planet does have a return. We don't really look at the inner planet returns much because those, like Mercury, Venus, Mars, those take, a couple of weeks or a couple of months usually. So 2 years for Mars. Right. It's not always significant enough for us to count, but for the outer planets, those show the larger trends. So a 250 or so year cycle is a huge deal. So it is a really important, in one's lifetime, you'll never have Pluto.
You're not going to have a Pluto return. You're not going to have a Neptune
personally,
return. No. You could have a Uranus return. So a Uranus return will happen around 83 or 84 if we're fortunate to live that long. Yeah. But and then you're likely to have about 7, 8, or 9 Jupiter returns.
Yeah, right? Which I know you talk about. Right.
I talk a lot about Jupiter returns. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then you can be fortunate to have 3 Saturn returns, but that's about it.
Right. For now. Maybe,
for now. I mean,
next
maybe
decade.
Right?
You never know.
Yeah, right.
With
the Pluto return taking the power, it's like, will we unleash the power to live longer?
It could.
I don't know why I have that accent suddenly, but you get the idea.
Right, because that's probably what it'll take. It's a little Dr. Evil-y at this point, How can we live to 120? Do we even want to? But
that's an interesting question. But yeah, so I mean, that's going back to the Pluto return. I think one of the things that we're going to be wrestling with in terms of the United States is that dimension of power, and I'm talking about within the United States. Mm-hmm. Now, as a country, going toward like the implications beyond our borders, I think that's another issue that we may be dealing with, because I think, our incumbent president ran on the platform of Make America Great Again. Mm-hmm. And I think many different people have, questioned like, well, what does it mean to be great? Right. When and is America great? I mean, when has America been great? Right. Can it be greater? And I think these are the questions that I believe that a question like the United States, a country like the United States needs to ask itself. Yeah. Because we consume so much of the world's resources, right? And we have to kind of weigh that against to how we kind of preserve ourselves and preserve the world.
Mm-hmm. So you're seeing a return of a planet as a time of reckoning, a time of a time of a review. How are we doing with Pluto themes of power, control?
And Pluto deals with the Earth too. I mean, because Pluto, when we're talking about the chthonic power of, Pluto, it's like he was the god of the underworld and all things related to what was beneath the surface. Mm-hmm. And what that meant in very real terms were the resources, in terms of, like, we talk about the plutocracy, right? Those who are in power and have wealth. Well, wealth, historically, classically came from, you know, having diamonds, rubies, gold, and other things that we access through mining. So we're dealing with those particular issues as well.
Yeah, and with Saturn and Pluto coming together, Saturn also ruling gems and things from the earth and rocks as well. You know, I mean, there's all of those themes.
And that's, I mean, it's interesting. The United States is attempting to broker a deal with China on terms of the tariffs, and you know, the president says that we're close to achieving that. We'll see. But I think among the different things that it's being negotiated, you know, we talk about soybeans and we talk about things and the fruits of the earth, but precious metals is also one of the things.
Yeah.
And precious metals are,
silver.
and gold and silver, but also precious metals that we use in order to have things like cell phones,
exactly,
and computers. And so I think these are the things, and a lot of those resources are in places that have a disparity in the wealth signatures between, you know, like quote unquote developed nations and underdeveloped nations. So I think those are the things, remaining questions that are going to be answered that we see with this Pluto return.
Yeah, so the Pluto will be in Capricorn until 2024.
That's right.
Early 25, I think, for
Then it goes into Aquarius.
And then Aquarius. So this decade, because we can go out a little more macro, yeah, choo. We're starting Capricorn, Earth, structures, hierarchies, and then we're starting the trend of Aquarius, which, you know, what's interesting about Aquarius is that it's co-ruled. The classic ruler is Saturn, which also rules Capricorn. So we're going to see continuation of the Capricorn themes of power and hierarchy, at least as I see it. And then we're also bringing in the major ruler of Aquarius, which has only been known about for a minute, well, a couple hundred years. Not even. Yes.
Well, I mean, it hasn't been
right?
given rulership until
Right.
maybe more like the 19th century, but it
I
was
had a math
discovered in
moment there.
1780, I'm going to say
Yeah,
89.
it was in the 1780s.
1781, I believe.
Yes, I think you're right about that. My Scorpio moon memory was looking for the date. Hard drive. So, yeah, around the same time that our last Pluto return was, interestingly. Uranus was discovered and has been the major ruler of Aquarius. So we have this dual energy, which is, because I think of Saturn as like the stern authoritarian parent, and Uranus as the rebellious teen or the youth who's like, but no, you don't understand. We need a revolution. We need something new. So it's this interesting almost paradox, dualistic nature. So, and then we're going to have Saturn moving into Aquarius for part of the year.
There's a couple things. You said a lot of things that were packed in there. One thing, as a more traditional astrologer, I look at the major ruler as Saturn.
Oh, you do?
I do.
Okay.
And I don't recognize Uranus as the ruler at all, but I do think, per what you said, there's a beautiful tie-in in terms of like the discrepancy between the past and the future. And here's where it's a little different. What's interesting about the modern association of Uranus with revolution is that Uranus is named after the sky god Uranus, right? Who was deposed by Saturn.
Right.
Right? So Uranus actually was not the revolutionary, right? But kind of like the despot who had to be overthrown. And Saturn actually was the revolutionary who eventually became the despot.
Okay.
So it's so I think those themes tie in, whether you like
tie in.
whether you kind of embrace Uranus as the ruler of Aquarius or you just use Saturn. I think both can work in the sense that we're talking about a really powerful story that is reiterated in a couple different ways with what's happening. So let me start with what I just said about Saturn and Uranus. One of the things is we have to be careful as we're talking about revolution.
Yes, what does that mean?
Of not becoming the despot, of not becoming the force that holds in power rather than shares it. What becomes most revolutionary, and this is the tie-in also with Jupiter, is that Saturn tries to kind of hold in time, hold in progress. And he actually, after he's usurped his father and cut his testicles off, that's actually in the myth,
We
right?
didn't make that up.
We didn't make that up.
You did not hear it here first.
He threw it into the ocean, and then from the foam in the ocean, from the testicles, I guess it was frothy, Venus, Aphrodite, came up. Anyway, much later, cut ahead, Saturn, his father curses him and says that your children will usurp you. Saturn is determined not to have that happen, so he starts eating his kids. I mean, he's real nasty, right? He's eating his kids. And actually his wife, his sister, I mean, times were weird then, deceives him, gives him a rock to eat, whisks away the child who we now know as Zeus, who grows up and then usurps his father. Now Zeus becomes known as Zeus Pater, which is Jupiter, right? In Latin, in Roman language. So Jupiter usurps Saturn, or Kronos, and that's kind of like what we're dealing with the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction that we have at the end of 2020, which is really significant because it's the establishment of more than 100 years of Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions every 20 years in air signs. Yes. We had that in 1980. It was called a mutation. You're like, what do you mean? Why was it a mutation? I was born in 1980. Am I a mutant? No. You're not
that's
a mutant.
up to you to decide.
Right? We'll leave that up to you, right? Sorry. But in 1980, we had a mutation, whereas before, we were dealing with Saturn-Jupiter conjunctions in Earth.
Yes.
And we had the most recent one in 2000. Now, classically, old-time astrology, back in the medieval ages, they would rely more on the Jupiter-Saturn cycles as determining major changes in human history.
Right, when they come together.
Right, and when they come together, it was like the birth of prophets. It's believed that when we talk about the Star of David, since we're kind of near the, not the Star of David, Star of Bethlehem, when we're talking about the Star of Bethlehem, we're really talking about a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction that the Magi found and saw, and that's announcing the birth of, Jesus. So I think I'm not saying like, oh, Sam, are you saying at the end of 2020 we're expecting a Messiah? I'm not saying that. I mean, there could be. I don't know.
Anything's possible.
Anything's possible. I think it's more so that we're talking about the themes that we've been talking about with Jupiter, Saturn, how we're talking about change in terms of the air signs, for example. So, I mean, that may be talking about innovations related to technology, how we communicate. In terms of the change that happened, the mutation in 1980, that was a watershed moment. I remember that. I was 12, and it was the election in the United States, at least, of Ronald Reagan. And you're like, well, he was blah, blah, blah. I mean, whatever you want to say about Reagan. We can go on about mixed feelings that we have in terms of the political spectrum. But that man was eloquent as hell.
Yeah.
Right?
And an Aquarius.
And an Aquarian. He definitely was an air sign. And he partly, helped to usher in a different era that really reshaped everything for the next pretty much 20, 30 years. And you're like, well, what do you mean? The Cold War? It was during, his presidency, and then that we saw things kind of break apart in what was the Soviet Union. And then that continued with Bush, with the first Bush, I should say, Per Bush. George Bush, and then we saw things kind of break apart. So we may be seeing some tectonic shifts that are happening in 2020 in terms of how, and then the end of 2020 into 2021, like the start of the 20s, on the political scene. And that goes back to something I said earlier about the United States and its relationship to power. So I do bring it back.
I love it.
The returns. But that is kind of the thing that we may be dealing with. On top of the Pluto return, the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction that we have at the end of 2020.
Yeah, in Aquarius. And I'm so curious about Saturn and Aquarius, because I feel like it could go, and that's from March to July of 2020, and then in late December it kicks in for a couple of years. We'll really settle into that and have the great conjunction and the solstice that you're talking about in December. But I feel like since Saturn is the despot, and so kind of can be very law and order, eat the kids instead of sharing the power with them. But then it's in Aquarius, which is, it's such a contradiction in some ways. Like, how might that play out? Because I feel like, could that suppress people's voices, or could it make it that people are more vocal about?
I think it's going to be both. I think, the Saturn in Aquarius, I mean, for more traditional classical astrologers, it's what we call his day home. You might say, if we want to put it in a different way, his summer home, right? There's his winter home, which is much more reserved, more receptive, which is Capricorn, and then his day home is a lot more assertive. So when he goes into Aquarius, he's really trying to govern more along the social realm and talk about how we bring people together in some cohesive fashion. Now, at its best, that can be bringing people in a cohesive fashion that's communicative, and I won't say egalitarian, but with the aspiration related to an ideal.
Right. You think you've seen co-working spaces and co-living spaces, you ain't seen
nothing yet. Right, exactly.
We work out, something new in. You know?
Right, exactly. A whole different level.
Maybe not out.
Oh, not out.
We like we work out, and I like we work.
Right.
But, Uranus was right over Adam Newman's sun.
Yeah, and I was about to say, let's hope
Taurus,
can rework.
Yeah,
what's going on?
They better rework.
They better rework what's kind of going on for them. But yeah, so I think we may be dealing with some measure of that. But what may be the challenge, this is the dark side of Aquarius. This is the thing we don't like to talk about when we talk about the age of Aquarius and other things, is that it's all fine as long as you're on board for my vision.
Right.
When you're not on board for my vision, then it's like, well, out. And it's kind of what I was also alluding to, is the difference between Saturn and Jupiter. Saturn wanted to kind of contain all the power. Saturn is always going to try to be Saturn, no matter what sign he's in. Yeah. So he's going to try to contain the power, right?
At all
the
times.
original control freak, right? He's going to try to kind of contain it, whereas Jupiter was like more distributing it. So that's why we have even Olympus. Olympus was about distributing the power of different modalities among different people. So like, we had a god of war, we have a god of communication, and we're going to have you could be the love goddess, and of course you take care of people, distribution
it's a job
of power.
For everyone.
Right. As versus Saturn's like, I'll do it. No, I'll do it.
I'll do that too. You're not doing that,
you don't
right?
have to do that.
That's not up to standard.
So I think that could be another dark thing that we're dealing with. And so it might be like we said, Saturn and Jupiter are kind of both trying to figure out distributing power, but at the same time, it could be like law and order trying to assert itself with a lot more vim and vigor.
And this kind of goes back to something you were saying earlier, like, where does ideology become, the ideology that drives what we'd call a revolution become more suppressive, this is the new right way to do things. So, we are even seeing some of that now. So I think we're going to probably have to deal with that. And Aquarius ruling technology, I feel like even on social media, the messages that are spread, and with data, we're going to look at how things are. Is this really equal, or is it giving the appearance of that?
Yeah, that's spot on, because we saw some of the shifts with Uranus going into Taurus. The question about privacy, what you own, right? Yeah. And so now we have Saturn and Jupiter in fixed signs again, and there are 4 fixed signs. There's Scorpio, there's Taurus, there's Aquarius, and Leo. So we're going to have both Aquarius and Taurus emphasized, when Saturn and Jupiter are both in Aquarius, and then we're going to have Uranus in Taurus. So that becomes significant in terms of looking at how those planets are relating as we move forward.
Yeah. I believe in our research, I love to look at Saturn cycles too, because you have every 30 years. So it's unlike Pluto, it's enough in a lifetime, or at least what, maybe your parents experienced or your kids, so you can see trends. So I believe the I Have a Dream speech was given during Saturn Aquarius as well, which is ideological. And it is.
Was it Saturn Aquarius?
Yeah.
You sure? Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
All right, because that would, you're right, because that would have been 1963.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There you go. Right.
Yeah.
You're
We always,
right.
when we do our annual book, we geek out on looking at where Saturn was. So Saturn, interestingly, Saturn, you probably know this, but was in Capricorn, which rules architecture and structures and walls. It was there when the Berlin Wall was built. Then it came back when the Berlin Wall was deconstructed. And now it's here when we have a president talking about building a wall on the U.S.-Mexico border. So there's been this recurring theme at least 3 times of walls. So, the Aquarius has been definitely Saturn and Aquarius times have been about, I think, power to the people, but also, you mentioned Reagan doing things differently. That's very Aquarian. Like, it's time for, whether it was revolution or not, it's time for some radical new change to the system and the
It's a new day in America, I believe he said.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, it's a new day in America, or a new dawn is coming in America. And I think, again, irrespective of how you may have felt about his politics, and it definitely augured some changes in terms of how things. And one thing that people may not, who weren't born then or didn't know, he wasn't expected to win. He won by a landslide. He crushed Carter. So it was like an overwhelming response on the part of the nation for a change.
Right. And now I'll revise, because Saturn was not an Aquarius then, but it was a Saturn-Jupiter conjunction at that time, or about to be. And that's where it really showed up, as like...
In an air sign, though. It was in Libra.
In an air sign, yeah.
Yeah,
so
it was in Libra. So, I think that...
Similar to the Saturn and Aquarius, there was a desire for new ideas, new information, new conversations, movement from what we knew.
And Jupiter in air likes that. So, again, I don't predict horse races, but
or
presidential ones, but I had some moment of pause in 2016 as Jupiter was in Libra. Because what I had observed, because Jupiter was in Libra again, as we were saying, in 1980, I was like, Jupiter in Libra is kind of conservative.
Yeah.
Right? He kind of wants to I'm conservative, not in the sense like I just want to keep my money, all these other things.
The moderation.
But like,
wants,
the revolution is almost like a counter-revolution in a sense. So it's like a reactive.
Yeah.
So I was like,
balance.
Yeah, I don't know. Because I'm going to be honest about this, and you probably heard a similar thing. There were a great number of astrologers in 2016 who did not predict Trump to win. A great number of them who just got it wrong. And a great number of them with a lot of vim and vigor and confidence, like, oh, no, I definitely, there's no way. Well, I did have pause. I didn't say I predicted him. I did not, but because I wasn't into that. But when I saw that Jupiter in Libra, I was like, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
So I'm saying a similar thing with this Jupiter in Aquarius. There's a lot of people who are like, nah, there's no way in hell, blah, blah. I'm like, I don't know. The Jupiter in Aquarius really... It's kind of more traditional, and especially being with Saturn in Aquarius, he might go along. That doesn't mean then, like, oh, are you saying then Trump is going to get reelected? I didn't get there. But I am saying that this expectation that if you have a very specific agenda along a certain spectrum, what I would say to you, and if I'm going to be blunt, if it's more like quote unquote progressive, right? You're going to have to think about how that could, you're going to have to be more strategic.
Yeah, you're going to have to be more Pluto-like. It's true. And, again, divorcing this from my personal ideology and politics, which will not be on camera, this is the Pluto return. This goes back to that. How we deal with power, including, like, if I just, put this person on blast and hate them and da-da-da, then magical thinking, they'll be outvoted and we'll get a new president. Exactly. Or he'll get impeached. He just has to, because he's so terrible according to my ideology. Well, there's a whole segment of the country who thinks he's the best thing that ever happened to it. Stock prices are up. So it's the recognition that what you think is right or wrong could be exactly opposite with someone else.
Right,
and this also goes be right.
And this also goes for the conservative line of thinking too. Like, oh well, these people will just come around and see the right way. No, we're not going away from each other. So we're going to have to either strategically advance each other, or we're going to have to start talking to each other in some way. I think that's also the air signal that we're getting.
Yeah.
You know, like, and I'm not just talking about in terms of kumbaya, you know, like, just put down your swords and just hug each other. I mean, that might be nice, but I think we are going to have to find some way in which to talk among ourselves and talk between each other without the expectation that we're just going to dissolve. Because, I mean, Saturn and Jupiter are going to be in fixed signs, and so things may be a lot more entrenched.
Yeah, it's gonna be tough. I mean, look, I look at the Pluto cycle, that 12 to 24 years approximately is, you know, everything's got to fall down. We're only 3/4 of the way through it now, so we have another 4 years. Started 2008 with Obama. We might end up with an orange president at the end, or we might not.
Well, I mean, and that's even significant.
Well, we
like,
could.
I mean, I am going to be slightly political here, and I don't think anyone on either end of the aisle would mind. Trump is a reaction to Obama. Yeah. I mean, like, I think there are people who are on the conservative spectrum probably would admit that, and I think we definitively, those who are on the progressive side, see that. And I think we're talking about the swinging of a pendulum. And I think as a country, we have to figure out, well, what are we really standing for? When we say, like, we the people, is it we the people that are only, quote unquote, born here, or the ones who aspire to come here as well?
Right. So much to question.
You know, it really becomes like, how do we talk about citizenry? You know, like, I think it's going to become a bigger issue, especially since signs work reflexively, as we kind of are now talking about Aquarius and eating the children. We're also going to be talking about the children, Leo, right? Yeah. So, I mean, we're going to probably be dealing more with the fetus question again. I think that's going to become an issue. Oh, yeah. It's like, well, what about the rights of the fetus? You know, and I'm like, okay. Again, not getting into my own politics, although you probably can read my face and read my politics.
But look, we get all the breaking news alerts on our phones too,
right.
and it's
I think
abortion ban bills being passed all the time.
I think that is going to be another key issue.
Yeah, I don't think that's going away. I mean, I've been searching for how can we, you know, we're kind of at the point where, like, we need to stop being divided and we need to come together, but I haven't landed on a how, and I'm wondering, you may have some ideas, how to talk. You know, you talk to somebody, but then they get to a point in the conversation where you're just so diametrically opposed, and becomes a question of values, which we're looking at with Uranus and Taurus, which is about values for the next 6 years, in 2020. You know, sometimes maybe you just can't. Maybe it's just an accepting we can't get on the same page about this.
I think that's important. One of the things I think about too with the Aquarius themes, you know, with Saturn and Jupiter both landing in Aquarius, I think, and then we're going to also be dealing with the nodes, with the North Node being in air. I think about community. So I think one way in which we can navigate these treacherous waters is about rethinking, rebuilding community. And I don't mean like in some broad sense, like, you know, delivering groceries for your neighbor or something like that. That would be nice. But I think community in terms of how you connect to people, like what we're doing, like the summit, like connecting to your group, your tribe, right? So it's really starting with building the people who you vibe with, rather than the people you don't vibe with. I mean, like, I think one of the things that has happened since 2016 is that we expend a lot of energy on the people we putatively hate, right? Yeah. Rather than spending as much time or more time with the people that we love. Mm-hmm.
This has come up in a number of these talks too. Okay. Community has arisen as, like, you know, just kind of naturally in conversation like this, as a theme of, like, that's going to be the thing that gets us through whatever comes our way in this.
And I think that's going to be important to re-navigate that, even in relation to social media, because one of the things I've also been thinking about and kind of even tapping the waters myself, you know, in terms of the astrology and thinking ahead to 2020, is like, are we really building community when we build a following? When we build, you know, like friends and all that, and fans? I'm not so sure. you know, and when I say I'm not so sure, I'm not knocking that because I mean, I'm, you know, established on social media. But at the same time, you know, in terms of that sense of heartfelt connection, because whenever you talk about Aquarius, you also have to keep in mind, like I said, reflexively, Leo, right? Yeah. The heart, right? The opposite sign. And so it's going to be, you know, as much as you kind of extend the energy out, which is more Aquarian, you have to talk about where it's coming from and where it goes to, which is the heart. So I think that's going to be important to navigate and negotiate in terms of how we are building connections. And that's not something that is easily, that we can easily get from social media. You know?
Not a lot of heart. Yeah.
Right.
But coming together, I'm into the, I've been fascinated with the hormone, the neurochemical oxytocin.
Yeah. Yeah.
Vitamin O, I call it. I
Yeah.
talked about this with Colin in our video too. The
Of course
bonding
you did.
hormone. Yes, of course. We're both kind of obsessed, right? But it flows when people come together and
That's
connect.
absolutely right.
And it is it lowers stress, particularly in women.
It's the cuddle thing. You know, after like post-coital, you know, coiling, that's oxytocin.
Yeah, exactly. Or breastfeeding, or looking at a baby, or holding a puppy. So pick your poison. Actually, it's not a poison. Pick your potion.
Pick your love,
but,
yeah.
Pick your love hormone. But actually, there was a study that said karaoke releases oxytocin.
Oh,
which
that makes
is
sense.
probably why I'm so obsessed with it, with the stressful writing job I have. But yeah, but I think, you know, look it up and ways to increase whatever decreases stress for you. It's not the only thing, but coming together is a stress reliever. The world is getting more stressful, and Pluto in Capricorn, which is about capitalism and the economy too, has really, and Saturn has turned up the heat, the pressure to make money, have taken some of the heart out of community and social media. And the original intention of it, I think, was people connecting and sharing. I mean, obviously it got quickly commercialized and commoditized if it wasn't from the get-go. But so it's okay, that might not be where that happens. So, you know, talking about how
That's
to come
interesting.
together in
Yeah, that
person.
you're saying that because I mean, like, it was a Gemini who kind of developed the protocol that became HTTP. Tim Berners-Lee.
Okay.
So now, he was a Gemini, or he is a Gemini. He's still very much with us. So it's, you know, what became the World Wide Web, and he didn't make any money off of it, and he didn't try to for the first few years of the World Wide Web. And I always look at that as instructive for how we talk about building that rapport that became the World Wide Web. It was just the idea. He just was curious about, how do I create a protocol by which to share information between platforms? Because that was an issue. I don't think people remember, like, if you had a Mac and then someone else had a PC, it was really hard to kind of swap files because they had completely different protocols, where that became nullified with the idea of the HTTP, right, which became the World Wide Web.
For which we are all on the summit grateful for. We would not be here if not for the HTTP. Yeah.
Right. So I think as we go into this moment of the North Node in Gemini and then all this air, it does become a moment where we can start talking about creating bridges and connections. But I think the starting point is going to be with the people you know, the people you like, the people you want to know better. I think we've been talking about communication, but I also would say it's important to talk about communion, the way in which we create communion with other people. And I don't mean like, Claudia,
not the Catholic Church kind
not the Catholic communion.
Communing together.
But communing together, more potlucks, more ways in which we kind of meet in person.
Watch Demetrius's talk for that.
Oh, yeah,
We
I
talked
know.
about food and potlucks and communing.
He's big on that.
Yeah,
and
he
is Aquarius. So.
Exactly. We need to follow his table. You said another C word that I really liked. I picked up on curious. Curiosity. Curiosity has gone missing a little bit with Pluto and Capricorn. It's gone underground.
That's
because
true.
it's been such reality, you know, has been beaten down some of the curiosity. Or maybe we have too much novelty, so we've lost our curiosity.
I can support that because I think one of the things, I tend to look at something, there are different ways in which you can break down generations. So I know you had Shakira on here, Shakira Taborn also looks at generations, but she looks at it through Pluto. I look at it through Uranus, but I look at activation points, which are the activation points come in a very weird way with something that we astrologers call the quincunx. So I was looking at the activation of the Uranus and Libra generation, those who were born when Uranus was in Libra. Their activation, was that you?
Yep.
Your activation came when Uranus was in Pisces, and so that was like, I believe, 2003.
Yes.
Right?
Oh, well,
so
that's true.
What that means is that the cardinals, Uranus and Libra, got very much into reality and the idea of sharing, but reality. So we saw like the proliferation of reality TV from that era. We also saw the growth of like things like Napster, like sharing, music sharing and video sharing and LimeWire and all the illegal shit that we had.
Illegal stuff that we didn't have a fast enough connection to download.
Right, but we tried. It was like we would start that night. And then, get it that way anyway.
Gen Z, you've got nothing.
But that's interesting that you'd say that. I mean, because I think it is the Pluto and Capricorn, but I think it's also the cardinality that we've been dealing with.
Yeah, with Uranus and
Aries.
Right,
Uranus and Aries, right? It's the same kind of thing. It's like hard hitting, just give it to me, rather than like, we may open up to more curiosity, more the mutable energy, the air energy. So that's.
I hope so. I mean, that's a great. So. Once again, the invitation for 2020 as we're navigating the Pluto return and looking at our relationship to power, look at it with curiosity.
Yeah.
Get curious about why you may be so entrenched in a belief. It doesn't mean you have to change it. You may conclude, you know what, because I really feel strongly about this, but figure out why instead of just parroting rhetoric.
I like the idea, the word entertain. Let me explain. Where you can entertain an idea without thinking that it has to be yours. I like that. You can hold space for it, right? And I think it was one of the ancient philosophers who described that as like the sign of a mature mind. And I think about that quite often, where you can entertain ideas without thinking that you have to kind of, push them away. And I think maybe that's something that we can cultivate more as we go into this airy moment, and also with the nodes shifting from Cancer to Capricorn, and then also in terms of the eclipses that come with it.
Yeah, Gemini and Sag are very curious and entertain almost anything. Take it from me as a Sag. So I love that. That's a really great. It's a really great message for people.
Yeah, I mean, and to kind of like put it in a different way, although some people may not like to hear this particular way I'm going to frame it, I think it's a willingness to learn lessons from all kinds of people. One thing I tweeted recently is that I can learn from anybody, but not everyone is my teacher, right? So it's kind of being open to learning. And one of the things I might mention is like talking about these eclipses with Gemini and Sag, is that we have a president who is along that axis. He is a sun in Gemini.
With the Gemini North Node.
With a Gemini North Node and a moon in Sag. Yeah. He's born just before an eclipse. I mean, like literally an hour or so before an eclipse. And why I'm bringing him up is irrespective of how we feel about the man, irrespective of how we feel about his politics, here's one thing I won't say admire, I can't bring myself to say that, but one thing I have taken note of is that there was a certain daring and curiosity in even becoming president. Or daring to be president.
From who he was before.
From not just who he was before, but even like, in terms of some of the things he talked about before. He ran for governor just maybe 2 years before, was talking about running for governor 2 years before he ran for president, maybe 2 or 3 years. And then, so when he was talking about running for president, as a New Yorker, I laughed. I was like, come on, not you. But he was curious enough to kind of put it out there and kind of do that. What's that for you in your life? Right. What can you be curious enough and daring enough that makes you nervous enough, feel ridiculous enough to do? And I think that's the invitation that we have with these air signs, and also the Jupiter and Saturn in conjunction in Aquarius. Aquarius is where we kind of experience the broadness of vision and thought in terms of how we kind of relate to an aggregate, to a social fabric. How willing are you to kind of put your own stake into that fabric, you know, whatever that might be for you. Yeah. So I think that becomes an important moment.
Yeah, that's an amazing way to leave people with a message and an opportunity for the new decade.
An opportunity, that's
an opportunity. We are astrologers, we are language geeks, because astrology is a new language.
It is.
And so we're mathematical, we're language.
Which is also a language.
Yeah, which is a language. So that's I think why people are being drawn to astrology, just because it gives you a little bit of space to take the charge out of everything, where you can entertain differences without it becoming polarizing, you know?
Right.
It's like you can stereotype someone 12 different ways and not anger them with the stars.
And that's not, I say that's not astrology, that's Scientology. I mean, Scientology has its place and it's very useful and very fun.
Right.
But astrology becomes a lot more complex. I mean, I always give this analogy that it's like the trailer of the movie. When we talk about signs, you know, when we do horoscopes, they're the trailers for a much bigger movie.
That's good. And that movie is where, who am I? Why am I this
Starring
way?
you.
Who are you and why are you this way? So get curious about that in 2020 and beyond. And thank you, Sam.
Thank you. This is fun.
I know.
Scorpio Sag energy. Unite.
Yeah.
Duh.
That's right. I love it. All right. Well, we will be back. We'll see. I'm sure we'll be doing more in 2020. I keep saying that to everybody because I'm like, we must. This is so fun. So wishing you a great year. Thanks, Sam. Is there anything, anything you want to share?
Well, check me out on unlockastrology.com. And also, like, if you want to follow me on Twitter, I am also going to be starting a round of classes in January. So I have classes, online classes. There, you don't have to, you know, kind of leave the comfort of your own home. You can be in your pajamas or, you know, like have your camera off and just be sky-clad. It doesn't matter.
Or start a little communal study group per hour, or entertain the idea of that.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So you can follow that in unlockastrology.com.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.